Hey everybody, Brian Hunt here with you again. In this video, we are talking about the Sigma 60-600 and why I wish I got this lens instead of the Sony 200-600 that I purchased earlier in the year. So full disclaimer, I have done work with Sigma Canada in the past, and they do send me lenses from time to time to test out, or I approach them and ask them about testing out some lenses. The 60-600 is one of these lenses. They sent this to me to play with and try. It was something I was very curious about because it has such a huge range on this lens. And I have to say, I wish I had this lens. I'm likely going to end up buying this lens, really. Let's go into some of the things about this lens and why I think it's an amazing lens for event coverage, for doing wildlife work, for doing stuff on safaris, anything like that where you need a really big range. This lens is pretty awesome. So first off, what are the two main differences between these lenses? They're both really incredible lenses. You get a really long range. 600 millimeter is amazing. But there's a few little things about these things that make them a bit different. Cost-wise, they're actually pretty much the same cost, within a couple $100 in Canadian funds. But one of the easy things to spot, and what you're going to know right off the bat, is the range on the 60-600 over a 200-600. Having that extra range on this lens is a pretty big deal. I do a lot of different kind of shooting, a lot of documentary style work, a lot of event coverage, a lot of capturing things of different ski, snowboard, bicycle events going on. And this kind of lens is really awesome to have. I've actually got the chance to use this on two different events that I covered. One was a pond skim event, and one was a cycling event, a gravel race or gravel ride event. Being able to quickly move from a focal length like a 60 millimeter, not a wide lens, but not a telephoto lens for sure, and be able to get all the way to 600 and have that on one lens without having to switch lenses on the camera was a big deal. Be able to move really quick with it, to be able to run around with that, to be able to get something at 100 millimeters, then move to 200 millimeters, then move to 400 millimeters, then move to 600 millimeters, and go right back to 60, like getting something when people are getting closer up again, as action is getting closer and closer to the camera, being able to reframe and have that on one lens. That's what really sold me on this. The flexibility with this. I also took this with me to Mexico with my family to try it out, shooting some surfing with it, and just shooting some wildlife and things around. And I was really, really impressed with the photo qualities and the image quality coming out of it. I myself couldn't really see much difference between these two lenses. So that's one of the big things off the top is that. Now, other different things on the lenses are, this is what you would call a push-pull lens. So I'm going to take off the lens hood here. So as you can see here, as I'm extending it, the lens gets longer and longer. Now, this has a few different benefits to it and a few not so great things with it. One of the obvious things is that the lens gets way longer. Your balance on a tripod or what you're on is going to change depending on how you change your focal length. Using something like this on a gimbal, not going to work. And I don't know why you'd want to use a lens this long on a gimbal anyways. I've seen other YouTube guys put like a 400-600 on the lens. But the difference on the Sony is that, I'm going to take the lens hood off this as well. It's all internally in the camera. So there's no moving of the actual lens. The distance of your lens in the front does not change outside the body. It's not a push-pull kind of style lens there. But again, you only have a 200 mil to a 600 mil. The Sony does look awesome. The white lenses do look awesome. I would say build quality, just feeling it, maybe the Sony G Master is a bit better. Very similar. F-stop wise in these two lenses. So the Sigma, when it's at its widest at 60 millimeters, is an f4.5. And at its longest range, it's an f6.3, which is the same on the Sony. The Sony is starts at an f5.6 at 200 millimeters and goes up to a 6.3 at your 600 millimeters. The way I typically work with a lens like this that has a variable, not a variable, but a stepping f-stop range as you go longer in the lens, which happens quite a bit on longer zoom lenses like this, is that I will typically set it, if I want to have my f-stop, let's say, f7 or f8 or 6.3, I'll just set it at that in the camera, so I use that throughout the whole range. So when I'm changing from 60 millimeters to 600 millimeters, my exposure is basically the same. I'm not changing my f-stop at all. I'm not having it as wide open as it can be all the time. That just works better for me and how I'm using it. So going back to the event coverage and capturing stuff that way, or kind of documentary style things when you're moving around really quickly, the 60 to 600 I didn't have to use on an event that I shot this winter, which was a World Cup ski cross race. Now, it was a big, long course, and it was myself covering it. I had another camera guy with me as well. We were covering it for Alpine Canada, and we were going to doing some recap videos for it, plus having some footage for them to use promotion for the event for next year. I was using a lot the 200 to 600 just to get that range. But there was times when I wanted to switch to a wider lens, and it was a bit cumbersome. It just, not cumbersome, but it took more time. I didn't have the ability to switch that quickly when I wanted to go from my, say, 70 to 200. With the 60 to 600, I basically have a 70 to 200 and a 200 to 600 in the same lens. I basically replaced those two lenses with one lens. Okay, so my 70 to 200, yes, it's an f2.8, and that's throughout the whole thing, and I wouldn't get rid of that lens, and I love that lens for a lot of stuff, but in a working environment like what I was doing at an event, running around, capturing a lot of different things, and being able to move quickly, there was some different weather going on, so changing lenses was a bit tricky. I was on a snowboard myself to get around, plus, we needed to have a backpack with gear in it, and snowing. Being able to have one lens that's kind of giving you this huge range would have been very beneficial. So when I got this lens, I took it to another event, which was a pond skim event. And I wanted to see that lens working there. Did a lot of different shooting with it there, and it was great. I used it probably 90% of the time at that event. I maybe put a little bit wider lens on for some of it, a Sigma 24 to 70, but otherwise I was shooting it all on the 60 to 600. Now, what you do have to note when you're using a lens that's this long on a video camera is that you likely want to have a very good video fluid head. I was using a Cartoni head on my Cartoni tripod. It can hold a good weight. I'm going to do a review on that tripod later. I mean, any length of focal length over 200 millimeter can be really tricky. You need a smooth and tripod head that can work really well, that can handle the weight. To help get those smooth tracking shots. But the Cartoni tripod worked great for that. The other event that I shot a bunch of stuff with this lens was this cycling event. So we got some great long lens stuff of people climbing hills. I was able to run around and do a little bit of handheld with this at a 60 millimeter length. Just very versatile. Again, we were in kind of a dirty environment, a lot of gravel coming up, a lot of things. I didn't want to be changing lenses all the time. So having this huge range really helped me out. And for some of the surfing and stuff I did in Mexico with my daughters, the photos were great on this. I mean, I got some really close-up shots of some pelicans flying, some cool stuff at sunset, some great surf stuff with this. Really a great photo lens and a great stills lens. So my regrets, do I regret buying the 200 to 600 just before finding out about the 60 to 600? And I would say yes. I would rather have the Sigma 60 to 600, sorry, too many sixes in here, as my main kind of long lens than my 200 to 600. I'm actually going to look at selling my 200 to 600 and just going with this Sigma one. Another big deal for this one for me is I've done a bunch of stuff. I have family in South Africa. I'll be going back in December, doing a safari there, doing some other things. This will be an amazing lens on safari. There are some times when animals are farther away and I want something like a 600 millimeter or a 400 millimeters. When we're in the safari vehicle, we're getting some animals like lions and stuff. Sometimes you can get quite close to them. So being able to go to a 60 millimeter and have that not so long focal length will be really, really useful. I mean, I think this could be, if you are doing birding, if you are doing wildlife stuff, the 60 to 600 lens, I think, is a key thing, especially if you're shooting E-mount. I think this lens is only available in Sony E or L mount, Leica L mount, but it's, it's awesome. It'd be a great, great thing for you to have in your kit. I could see myself traveling with this if I was doing something like that, shooting in a safari, capturing some other stuff that way. probably having just the 60 to 600, maybe have my 24 to 105 with me or 24 to 70 with me, and then likely a wider lens, maybe a 20 mil or a 16 to 35. And then I'd be set. I'd have everything I needed to cover all the stuff I needed to do in a relatively smaller kit. Now, they're both quite big lenses, and they both weigh quite a bit. I would say maybe the Sigma weighs a bit more, but they're quite comparable that way. So an important thing with this lens, and you also have on the Sony lens, and any lens of this length, anything over even 100 millimeters, going up to 200 millimeters or more, is image stabilization, having image stabilization in the lens. Especially on a video camera, when I was shooting with my Sony FX6, there's no in-body stabilization. So having that on a longer lens is a big deal and really helps to make sure you're not getting this crazy vibration and shake in your lens, which you can get on a longer lens if you don't have that IS. I found the IS on this Sigma one to work really good, to work just as good as my experience with the Sony 200 to 600. Other different things between the two lenses is for the photo sides, and I think this is only on Sony and only on the, well, it'd only be on Sony with the Sony lens, obviously, but only on a certain Sony cameras like the Sony A7SIII, when you can do 30 frames per second photo, continuous photos at its full resolution. Now, you can only do that with that Sony camera with a native Sony lens. I don't know why this is. It's probably from Sony to try to make sure you buy Sony lenses to have that feature. But for me, it's not a big deal. I don't have an A1, and I'm using the A7R5 for photos and video. Sometimes if I'm using a kind of a hybrid camera, having 15 frames per second, photo bursts, and continuous with this lens was not a problem for me. I didn't need anything more than that. But if you were somebody concerned about those things and you needed to have that 30 frames per second, that is a consideration with the Sony lens. So thanks so much, guys, for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think I should sell my 200 to 600? Have you tried out the 60 to 600? Do you think it's a better lens? Do you think the quality is better on the Sony lens? Let me know what you guys are looking forward to seeing in the next upcoming videos, and we'll see you guys on the next one.